Section 38 of Gray's Anatomy Part 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by M.L. Cohen. Anatomy of the Human Body Part 4 by Henry Gray. Anterior Divisions of the Spinal Nerves Part 3. The median nerve, nervus medianus, extends along the middle of the arm and forearm to the hand. It arises by two roots, one from the lateral and one from the medial cord of the brachial plexus. These embrace the lower part of the axillary artery, uniting either in front of or lateral to that vessel. Its fibers are derived from the 6th, 7th, and 8th cervical and 1st thoracic nerves. As it descends through the arm, it lies at first lateral to the brachial artery, about the level of the insertion of the coracobrachialis. It crosses the artery, usually in front of but occasionally behind it, and lies on the medial side at the bend of the elbow, where it is situated behind the laceratus fibrosus, bicipital fascia, and is separated from the elbow joint by the brachialis. In the forearm, it passes between the two heads of the pronator teres and crosses the ulnar artery but is separated from this vessel by the deep head of the pronator teres. It descends beneath the flexor digitorum sublimis, lying on the flexor digitorum profundus to within 5 centimeters of the transverse carpal ligament. Here it becomes more superficial and is situated between the tendons of the flexor digitorum sublimis and flexor carporadialis. In this situation, it lies behind, and rather to the radial side of, the tendon of the palmaris longus, and is covered by the skin and fascia. It then passes behind the transverse carpal ligament into the palm of the hand. In its course, through the forearm, it is accompanied by the median artery, a branch of the volar interosseous artery. With the exception of the nerve to the pronator teres, which sometimes arises above the elbow joint, the median nerve gives off no branches in the arm. As it passes in front of the elbow, it supplies 1 or 2 twigs to the joint. In the forearm, its branches are muscular, volar interosseous, and palmar. The muscular branches, rami musculares, are derived from the nerve near the elbow and supply all of the superficial muscles on front of the forearm except the flexor carpi ulnaris. The volar interosseous nerve, nervus interosseous antebrachiovolaris, anterior interosseous nerve, supplies the deep muscles on the front of the forearm except the ulnar half of the flexor digitorum profundus. It accompanies the volar interosseous artery along the front of the interosseous membrane in the interval between the flexor pollicis longus and flexor digitorum profundus, supplying the whole of the former and the radial half of the latter, and ending below in the pronator quadratus and wrist joint. The palmar branch, ramus cutaneus palmaris, nervus mediani, of the median nerve arises at the lower part of the forearm. It pierces the volar carpal ligament and divides into a lateral and a medial branch. The lateral branch supplies the skin over the ball of the thumb and communicates with the volar branch of the lateral antebrachial cutaneous nerve. The median branch supplies the skin of the palm and communicates with the palmar cutaneous branch of the ulnar. In the palm of the hand, the median nerve is covered by the skin and the palmar aponeuroses, and rests on the tendons of the flexor muscles. Immediately after emerging from under the transverse carpal ligament, the nerve becomes enlarged and flattened and splits into a smaller lateral and larger medial portion. The lateral portion supplies a short, stout branch to certain of the muscles of the ball of the thumb, that is, the abductor brevis, the opponens, and the superhead of the flexor brevis, and then divides into 3 proper volar digital nerves. 2 of these supply the sides of the thumb, while the third gives a twig to the 3rd lumbricalis and is distributed to the radial side of the index finger. The medial portion of the nerve divides into 2 common volar digital nerves. The first of these gives a twig to the 2nd lumbricalis and runs toward the cleft between the index and middle fingers, where it divides into 2 proper digital nerves for the adjoining side of these digits. The second runs towards the cleft between the middle and ring fingers and splits into 2 proper digital nerves for the adjoining sides of these digits. It communicates with a branch from the ulnar nerve and sometimes sends a twig to the 3rd lumbricalis. Each proper digital nerve, opposite the base of the first phalanx, gives off a dorsal branch which joins the dorsal digital nerve from the superficial branch of the radial nerve and supplies the integument on the dorsal aspect of the last phalanx. At the end of the digit, the proper digital nerve divides into 2 branches, one of which supplies the pulp of the finger, the other ramifies around and beneath the nail. The proper digital nerves, as they run along the fingers, are placed superficial to the corresponding arteries. The ulnar nerve, nervus ulnaris, is placed along the medial side of the limb and is distributed to the muscles and skin of the forearm and hand. It arises from the medial cord of the brachial plexus and derives its fibers from the 8th cervical and 1st thoracic nerves. It is smaller than the median, and lies at first behind it but diverges from it in its course down the arm. At its origin, it lies medial to the axillary artery and bears the same relation to the brachial artery as far as the middle of the arm. Here, it pierces the medial intramuscular septum, runs obliquely across the medial head of the triceps brachii, and descends to the groove between the medial epicondyle and the olecranon, accompanied by the superior ulnar collateral artery. At the elbow, it rests upon the back of the medial epicondyle and enters the forearm between the two heads of the flexor carpi ulnaris. In the forearm, it descends along the ulnar side lying upon the flexor digitorum profundus. Its upper half is covered by the flexor carpi ulnaris. Its lower half lies on the lateral side of the muscle, covered by the integument and fascia. In the upper third of the forearm, it is separated from the ulnar artery by a considerable interval, but in the rest of its extent lies close to the medial side of the artery. About 5 centimeters above the wrist, it ends by dividing into a dorsal and a volar branch. The branches of the ulnar nerve are articular to the elbow joint, muscular, palmar cutaneous, dorsal, and volar. The articular branches to the elbow joint are several small filaments which arise from the nerve as it lies in the groove between the medial epicondyle and the olecranon. The muscular branches, rami musculares, 2 in number, arise near the elbow. One supplies the flexor carpi ulnaris, the other the ulnar half of the flexor digitorum profundus. The palmar cutaneous branch, ramus cutaneous palmaris, arises about the middle of the forearm and descends on the ulnar artery, giving off some filaments to the vessel. It perforates the volar carpal ligament and ends in the skin of the palm, communicating with the palmar branch of the median nerve. The dorsal branch, ramus dorsalis manus, arises about 5 centimeters above the wrist. It passes backward beneath the flexor carpi ulnaris, perforates the deep fascia, and, running along the ulnar side of the back of the wrist and hand, divides into 2 dorsal digital branches. One supplies the ulnar side of the little finger, the other the adjacent sides of the little and ring fingers. It also sends a twig to join that given by the superficial branch of the radial nerve for adjoining sides of the middle and ring fingers, and assists in supplying them. A branch is distributed to the metacarpal region of the hand, communicating with the twig of the superficial branch of the radial nerve. On the little finger, the dorsal digital branches extend only as far as the base of the terminal phalanx, and on the ring finger as far as the base of the second phalanx. The more distal parts of these digits are supplied by dorsal branches derived from the proper volar digital branches of the ulnar nerve. The volar branch, ramus volaris manus, crosses the transverse carpal ligament on the lateral side of the pisiform bone, medial and a little behind the ulnar artery. It ends by dividing into a superficial and a deep branch. The superficial branch, ramus superficialis, nerve ulnaris, supplies the palmaris brevis and the skin on the ulnar side of the hand, and divides into a proper volar digital branch for the ulnar side of the little finger, and the common volar digital branch which gives a communicating twig to the median nerve and divides into 2 proper digital nerves for the adjoining sides of the little and ring fingers. The proper digital branches are distributed to the fingers in the same manner as those of the median. The deep branch, ramus profundus, accompanied by the deep branch of the ulnar artery, passes between the abductor digiti quinti and flexor digiti quinti brevis. It then perforates the opponens digitis quinti and follows the course of the deep volar arch beneath the flexor tendons. At its origin, it supplies the 3 short muscles of the little finger. As it crosses the deep part of the hand, it supplies all the interossei and the 3rd and 4th lumbricales. It ends by supplying the adductores pollicis and the medial head of the flexor pollicis brevis. It also sends articular filaments to the wrist joint. It has been pointed out that the ulnar part of the flexor digitorum profundus is supplied by the ulnar nerve. The 3rd and 4th lumbricales, which are connected with the tendons of this part of the muscle, are supplied by the same nerve. In a like manner, the lateral part of the flexor digitorum profundus and the 1st and 2nd lumbricales are supplied by the median nerve. The 3rd lumbricalis frequently receives an additional twig from the median nerve. The radial nerve, nervus radialis musculospiral nerve, the largest branch of the brachial plexus, is the continuation of the posterior cord of the plexus. Its fibers are derived from the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th cervical and 1st thoracic nerves. It descends behind the first part of the axillary artery and the upper part of the brachial artery, and in front of the tendons of the latissimus dorsi and teres major. It then winds around from the medial to lateral side of the humerus in a groove with the arterior profundae brachii, between the medial and lateral heads of the triceps brachii. It pierces the lateral intermuscular septum and passes between the brachialis and brachioradialis to the front of the lateral epigastrus.